Children just being a little bit frightened, sort of fristle if he wants to be scared.
It has been an incredibly tough for our entire family.
When Queen Camilla leaned in to speak to Princess Charlotte, she didn't realize Catherine was watching. And what happened next changed everything. The day, like any other spring weekend in the royal calendar, was meticulously planned, full of family obligations, all set against the familiar backdrop of majestic Windsor. But this gathering felt different to Catherine. Over the years, she had learned to trust her instincts, especially when it came to her children. That morning, Charlotte had been unusually quiet, not upset or defiant, just oddly withdrawn. And for little Charlotte, that was alarming. The family had gathered for a private luncheon to celebrate one of Queen Camilla's recent charitable patronages. These events weren't uncommon, but often brought together multiple generations of royals and extended relatives who didn't always get along seamlessly. Charlotte had been asked to sit with the younger cousins in a side salon, formal but casual by royal standards. Catherine kissed her daughter's forehead and left, not realizing she'd soon be needed. The whisper that changed everything. It started with a comment, a quiet dismissal, a little girl shrinking under the weight of a royal remark. What Queen Camilla said to Princess Charlotte may have seemed harmless, but Catherine was watching, and in that moment, the future queen made a choice that would change everything. This is the story of how one mother finally drew the line inside the palace. Here's the thing about Catherine, the future queen. She's patient. She's composed. She's spent years perfecting the royal smile, the polite nod, the diplomatic silence. But if you come for her kids, oh, that's a whole different story. Let's back up for a second. It was supposed to be just another routine royal gathering at Windsor. Tea, finger sandwiches, polite small talk about horses and weather forecasts. The kind of thing where everyone knows their role, smiles for the cameras, and pretends nothing weird ever happens behind palace walls. But then came Camilla. Apparently, Queen Camilla couldn't help herself. She leaned over to little Charlotte and whispered something about how some girls just aren't cut out for royal life. Cue the nervous laughter from the sidelines. You know, the kind people do when they're not sure if they just witnessed shade or a joke. But Charlotte knew, and more importantly, so did Catherine. What happened next was something the future queen would remember for the rest of her life. See, for years she'd been the royal family's peacemaker, the calm one, the steady one, the woman who always knew how to smooth things over. But that afternoon at Windsor? That was different. That was the moment Catherine realized there are times when diplomacy isn't enough, especially when it comes to your child. After hearing what Charlotte said, Catherine crouched down, eye level with her daughter, and hugged her tight. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered, and she meant it. But inside, Catherine's mind was spinning. This wasn't just about a snide comment. It wasn't about protocol or palace etiquette. It was about power. Catherine's silent fury. Because the royal family might smile for the cameras, but behind those palace walls, there are still invisible lines drawn. Who's up? Who's down? Who gets to speak? Who's told to stay silent? And Camilla, whether she meant to or not, had just tried to put Charlotte in her place. Well, Catherine wasn't about to let that slide. Once she calmed Charlotte, she walked her back to the private family room, settled her quietly next to George and Louis, and gave them all a reassuring glance. Then she stood up, smoothed her dress, and went looking for Camilla. And make no mistake, she found her. Sources say Catherine approached Camilla with the kind of grace you'd expect from a future queen, but the conversation? That wasn't polite small talk. Behind closed doors, Catherine confronted her stepmother-in-law directly. "We need to talk," she reportedly said. Now, Camilla, who's been known to have a sharp tongue and an even sharper sense of entitlement, wasn't expecting this. She tried to brush it off at first, calling it a misunderstanding. But Catherine didn't budge. According to insiders, Catherine laid it all out, calm, firm, no room for confusion. "You don't get to speak to my daughter like that, ever." It wasn't about titles or crowns at that moment. It was about a mother defending her child. And for the first time in a long time, Catherine didn't care about keeping the peace. She cared about setting boundaries. Witnesses say Camilla looked rattled. She's not used to being checked, especially not by Catherine, who's typically known for keeping her emotions in check. But this was different. Catherine wasn't just speaking for Charlotte. She was speaking for herself, too. Years of swallowing quiet slights, ignoring side comments, letting things go for the sake of the family. It all bubbled up right there in that hallway. A mother's warning. And once it was out in the open, Catherine made it clear. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug. By the time the luncheon wrapped up, the atmosphere had completely shifted. People noticed the tension. Small conversations got quieter. Even William, who's usually the one navigating family politics, reportedly stood back and let his wife handle it. Because here's the truth. When Catherine stood up for Charlotte, she wasn't just defending her daughter. She was drawing a line in the royal sand, and from that day on, the family knew. The days of pushing Catherine around were over. So now the palace whispers have a new favorite topic. Is this just a one-time moment? Or has the future queen found her voice for good? If so, the monarchy might never be the same. That evening, once the cars had pulled away from Windsor and the royal luncheon was over, Catherine sat quietly in the passenger seat of the car beside William. Her mind was racing, but her face stayed composed. The same face she'd worn at countless official events. William, oblivious at first, was going on about the day. Something about his father, King Charles, and a discussion they'd had over state matters. He didn't notice the way Catherine's hands tightened in her lap. He didn't see the way her gaze stayed locked on the road, even though her mind was far away. When they finally got home and the children were settled upstairs, Catherine sat down on the couch and exhaled slowly. That's when she decided it was time to talk. "Will, can we have a word?" Now, William knows his wife well. He knows when something's bothering her. But this time, the tone in her voice was sharper than usual. Not angry, but not soft either. It was firm, controlled. Catherine explained everything. The hallway moment with Charlotte. The comment about showing off. The pattern she'd started to notice was subtle digs from Camilla that always seemed to fly just under the radar. It wasn't the first time, she admitted. There had been little remarks at dinners, condescending corrections during family outings, and quiet critiques disguised as advice. And it always seemed to land on Charlotte. William's initial reaction was protective, but cautious. He wanted to believe it wasn't intentional. After all, family tensions in royal circles were complicated. But Catherine wasn't having that tonight. "Look, I signed up for this life," she told him, her eyes locking onto his. "But I did not sign up for someone scolding our children just because they feel like they can." This wasn't about protocol anymore. It was about parenting and respect. For years, Catherine had swallowed the occasional cold glance from Camilla. The digs about doing things the Windsor way, the veiled reminders about hierarchy. Catherine had smiled, nodded, and carried on. That's what you do when you marry into the firm, right? But she'd always believed, naively perhaps, that the children were off-limits. Apparently, she'd been wrong. William sat back, the weight of the conversation settling over him. He knew his wife wasn't exaggerating. She never did. And if Catherine had reached the point of bringing this up, it meant the line had truly been crossed. So, they made a decision together that night. No more pretending. No more looking the other way for the sake of keeping the peace. From now on, they'd be watching. And if Camilla, or anyone else in the royal inner circle, tried to undermine or belittle their children again, they'd handle it head-on. William promised to speak with his father privately to set clearer boundaries. Catherine, meanwhile, decided she'd no longer keep silent just to appear gracious. Because, at the end of the day, this wasn't about titles or thrones. It was about being parents, protecting their kids. And that night, as they stood quietly in the kitchen after the conversation, Catherine poured herself a cup of tea, glanced up at William, and said something that stuck with him. "We've taught our children to stand up for themselves, Will. It's time we do the same." From that moment on, things inside the royal household were different. The smiles at public events stayed in place, but behind closed doors, the dynamic had shifted. Catherine wasn't just the Duchess anymore. She was a mother on a mission. And Camilla? Well, she had no idea what was coming next. That night at Adelaide Cottage, after Charlotte finally drifted off to sleep, Catherine quietly closed the door to her daughter's room. Her mind was spinning, but her steps were steady. She walked down the hall, past the soft flicker of lamplight, her lips pressed into a thin line. William was still in the study, wrapping up a late call with his private secretary. When he saw his wife pass the doorway, he ended the conversation quickly. "Is Charlotte all right?" he asked, concern in his voice. Catherine paused, her back still facing him for a moment, before she turned around. Her eyes weren't teary. They were sharp, focused. "We need to talk," she said quietly, walking into the study and closing the door behind her. William put down his phone, instantly knowing this wasn't just a casual check-in. This was serious. Catherine sat down across from him and told him everything, again. Today's incident at the palace had pushed things over the edge. During the family gathering, while the other children played, Charlotte had simply asked if she could play the piano. A harmless, innocent question. But Camilla, she shut it down. Again, not kindly, not diplomatically, dismissively. "Not now, Charlotte. Stop trying to be the center of attention." Catherine had been standing nearby, pretending to chat politely with one of the extended royals, but she heard every word. Her eyes locked with Camilla's for a split second, and in that moment, Camilla knew she'd crossed the line. Later that evening, Catherine sat on Charlotte's bed, brushing her hair back, asking gentle questions. "Did what Granny Camilla said make you feel upset?" At first, Charlotte gave the classic child answer. "I'm fine, Mummy." But Catherine knew better. She studied her daughter just like she studied the royal family all these years, carefully, quietly, noting the patterns. She coaxed Charlotte gently, and eventually, the truth came out. "Sometimes I think Granny Camilla doesn't like me talking so much." That sentence hit Catherine like a gut punch. Not because it was dramatic, because it was real. After tucking Charlotte in and kissing her forehead, Catherine walked down the hall, her mind already made up. When she told William everything, she laid it out plainly. Not just today's piano incident, but the whole pattern she'd observed over months. The little slights, the subtle dismissals, the way Camilla's tone would shift only when Charlotte spoke up. At first, William tried to reason it out. Maybe Camilla was just old school. Maybe she didn't realize how her words landed. But the more Catherine explained, the clearer it became. This wasn't a one-off situation. This was systematic. And the truth was, Charlotte had noticed. A 10-year-old should not be questioning whether she's allowed to speak. That was the moment the two of them, William and Catherine, made a decision. No more brushing it off. No more letting it slide because of royal politics. Breaking the royal silence. They agreed to handle the situation together as a united front. William promised to speak directly to his father, King Charles, to ensure the issue didn't get buried under royal formalities. Catherine, on her part, decided she would no longer stay silent in moments like these, no matter how uncomfortable it made the family gatherings. Because the truth was, they weren't just raising a future queen or a future prince. They were raising children who deserved kindness and respect, no matter who they were or what crown they'd one day wear. And if someone in the royal circle couldn't manage that, well, William and Catherine were ready to make it crystal clear. This family comes first. Even before the future king and queen would plan on how to go about the issue, another event took them to the palace. The tension in the room was so thick you could have sliced it with a butter knife. It was supposed to be a simple family evening, one of King Charles's attempts to bring everyone together under one roof. Grandchildren running about, adults sipping wine, smiling for the sake of tradition. But this time, no one was smiling. Catherine had walked in with William and the kids, determined to keep things civil. Charlotte, always the polite one, had greeted everyone in the room with her usual cheerful charm. She even mustered the courage to greet Camilla, despite everything that had happened over the past few weeks. And what did Camilla do? She ignored her, didn't even look her way. Instead, she sipped her wine and, loud enough for the whole room to hear, murmured, "Well, poor Charlotte must be too tired for all this. Maybe these family events are just too much for her." It wasn't just a comment. It was a dismissal, a dig, and everyone knew it. William shifted uncomfortably in his chair, fiddling with his cufflinks. But Catherine? She was done holding back. She knelt beside Charlotte, whispered, "Go tell Grandpa good night, darling, and head upstairs with the other kids." Charlotte gave her mother a little nod and went off without fuss, leaving the room eerily quiet. The only sound was the soft clinking of Camilla's glass as she swirled her wine. And then came the comment that broke the last thread of Catherine's patience. "You know," Camilla said casually, almost like she was talking about the weather, "Charlotte's a bit too sensitive. Some kids just are." That was it. Catherine straightened her back, stepped forward, and locked eyes with the queen consort. Her tone was calm, but her words carried the weight of years of quiet observation. "Actually, Charlotte's not sensitive. She's kind. She's thoughtful. There's a difference." The room froze. Camilla let out a short, clipped laugh, trying to play it off. "Oh, come now, Catherine. I'm just saying." But Catherine cut her off, her voice still low, but now laced with something colder. "No, Camilla, you're not just saying anything. You're making comments about my child. You've done it before, and you did it again tonight." Camilla's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening slightly on her wineglass. "Well, forgive me for trying to help raise royal children the proper way." Catherine didn't flinch. "Proper? Since when does proper mean silencing a child? Since when does it mean shaming them for being themselves?" By now, the room had gone completely silent. King Charles looked at his hands. William's jaw tightened, but he let his wife speak. He knew this was her moment to stand her ground. Camilla tried to wave it off, but Catherine pressed forward, her voice calm but cutting. "Let me make this very clear. Charlotte will never be told she's too much, or too delicate, or too sensitive, especially not by someone who should be setting an example." Camilla's face flushed, but she stayed silent this time. She wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by Catherine. But there it was. The line had been drawn, clearly and publicly. Catherine didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene. But her words echoed louder than any royal decree. When she sat back down beside William, he reached for her hand under the table. A small gesture, but it said everything. They were united in this, and from that night forward, the message was clear. Catherine wasn't just protecting her daughter. She was changing the rules of the royal game. A dig too far. The tension had reached its boiling point. After Catherine's public defense of Charlotte, the room had fallen into a strange, frozen silence. But it didn't end there, because now King Charles decided to intervene. Later that evening, when most of the guests had drifted off to other rooms, leaving just the close family behind, Charles quietly asked everyone to sit down. He wanted to smooth things over. That was his way. Never let royal disagreements linger too long, at least not where people could see. With a sigh, he looked at Camilla first. "Darling, perhaps," he began carefully, choosing his words like he was walking on glass. "Perhaps you should consider that what you're saying to Charlotte isn't being received the way you intend." Camilla scoffed softly, swirling her wineglass again. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Charles! They're making a mountain out of a molehill." That's when Catherine calmly cut in. Her tone wasn't emotional or accusatory, it was composed, deliberate, but there was steel beneath the surface. "Your Majesty, with respect, this isn't a one-time molehill." She looked directly at Camilla, eyes steady. "This has happened again and again, not once, not twice, but repeatedly, and it's not a misunderstanding." Camilla's gaze darted toward William, as if silently pleading for him to say something, but William stayed silent, his expression unreadable. Catherine leaned forward slightly, keeping her tone soft but unwavering. "I've done everything I can to keep the peace in this family," she said. "I've smiled through things I probably shouldn't have for the sake of unity. But this stops here. I will not sit back and watch anyone chip away at my daughter's confidence. Not at family dinners, not at charity events, not ever." Camilla shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Kate, you're reading far too much into this. Honestly, it's just harmless advice. Children need to learn not to interrupt adults. That's all I meant." But Catherine wasn't buying it. "There's a difference between teaching manners and silencing a child," she replied, eyes narrowing slightly, "especially when it only ever seems to happen to one particular child." Camilla let out an exaggerated sigh, as if the whole thing was beneath her. But the room knew better now. This wasn't a petty argument. This was about respect, and the line had been crossed. Finally, William spoke up. His voice was calm, but carried the quiet weight of finality. "Camilla, all we're asking for is basic respect for Charlotte." His words hung in the air for a moment, and when Camilla turned to Charles again, silently begging for him to step in, to take her side, he didn't. King Charles remained silent, his face serious. He knew exactly who was right and who was wrong, and for once, he wasn't going to smooth it over with platitudes or brush it aside for the sake of royal appearances. That silence spoke volumes. After a long pause, Catherine reached for William's hand, gave it a gentle squeeze, and the two of them stood up. "Thank you for listening," Catherine said, her voice still polite, but her message crystal clear. Without another word, they excused themselves from the room and walked out together, leaving Camilla and Charles behind. As they left, the message wasn't just about Charlotte anymore. It was about setting a new standard for the next generation of royals. William and Catherine had drawn the line, and they weren't backing down. From that night on, the family dynamic had officially changed, and Camilla, for perhaps the first time, realized she was no longer the only woman with influence behind palace doors. Upstairs at Windsor that night, Catherine sat quietly by Charlotte's bedside, running her fingers gently through her daughter's hair. She didn't ask if anything was wrong this time. There was no need to relive the evening. Charlotte had already been through enough. Instead, Catherine spoke softly, choosing her words with care. "Darling, always remember, you must be polite, even when others aren't. You must be kind, even when people are not kind to you. But kindness doesn't mean letting people make you feel small. Do you understand?" Charlotte, half asleep, nodded against her pillow. There were no tears tonight, just quiet reflection, the kind that lingers with a child far longer than any playground squabble. Catherine kissed her forehead, whispered goodnight, and stayed there for a few extra moments, listening to the rhythm of her daughter's breathing. Downstairs, the mood was entirely different. The King's Dilemma. King Charles, hoping to keep the peace as always, tried once again to reason with Camilla. But Camilla wasn't in the mood for apologies. "Oh, come off it, Charles," she muttered, glass in hand. "Children need toughening up. Charlotte's too delicate. That's the real problem here." Charles sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew this wasn't going to end easily. Camilla wasn't the type to back down when she believed she was right. But deep down he also knew Catherine had a point. Camilla's jabs were too consistent to be dismissed as innocent guidance. Back at Adelaide Cottage later that week, the weight of the situation lingered. After the kids were asleep, Catherine sat with William in the sitting room, tea in hand, her voice steady but resolute. "She doesn't have to respect me," Catherine said quietly, looking William straight in the eyes. "I can take it. I have, for years. But she will treat Charlotte with respect. That part is non-negotiable." William nodded. No argument this time. "I agree," he replied. Enough is enough. And so, a new chapter began. One where Catherine stopped playing by the unspoken royal rules of silent endurance. She started setting her own boundaries, and not just behind closed doors. The first bold move came at Charlotte's next school event. It was a special day, a small recital and awards ceremony for the children, something Charlotte had been looking forward to for weeks. Usually, such events meant sending out invitations to the entire royal circle, whether out of duty or expectation. But this time, Catherine did something different. She only invited close family. Charlotte's maternal grandparents, Carol and Michael Middleton, were at the top of the list. So were a few cousins and godparents Charlotte adored. But noticeably absent, Queen Camilla. For the first time, Catherine made no excuses. No polite cover story. No, "Oh, perhaps next time." She simply left Camilla off the guest list. Word got back to Camilla quickly, of course. Palace whispers ensured that. And when she found out, it hit her hard. Not because she wanted to watch a school play, but because she knew exactly what this meant. It was happening. She was being put in her place. For years, Camilla had operated under the assumption that she could push certain boundaries, that her senior status in the royal hierarchy gave her free rein over the family dynamic. But Catherine had just reminded her that motherhood trumps monarchy. And when it came to Charlotte, Catherine wasn't playing the old royal game anymore. The message was clear. Respect was no longer optional. A quiet revolution. And for the first time in a long time, the royal family realized that Catherine, the quiet, composed duchess who had once kept the peace at any cost, was no longer afraid to rewrite the rules. That summer at Balmoral was different from all the summers before it. For years, the royal family had gathered there in the quiet of the Scottish Highlands, escaping London's formality for crisp air, long walks, and time away from the public eye. It had always been the late Queen's tradition, a place where titles faded and family took center stage, at least on the surface. But this time, the undercurrents were impossible to ignore. Catherine arrived with William and all 3 children. George, Charlotte, and Louis, determined to keep the peace, but on her own terms. Before they even unpacked their bags, she quietly told William, "I'm not leaving Charlotte alone. Not for a second. Not this time." And she meant it. King Charles was the first to arrive, as usual. He greeted his grandchildren warmly, scooping up little Louis in a playful hug, and sharing a light moment with George about fishing in the nearby river. Charlotte stayed close to Catherine's side, a quiet but watchful shadow. Camilla came a day later, as expected, with her usual entourage of aides and friends. But this time, there was no grand entrance, no attempt to assert herself as the center of attention. She was quieter than usual, noticeably so, and for good reason. Since that evening at Windsor, the night Catherine had drawn a very public line, Camilla hadn't spoken directly to Catherine at all. There had been no apologies, no forced conversations, just silence, polite nods at formal events, and a mutual agreement to keep distance. At Balmoral, that unspoken distance became even more obvious. Family meals were shared, but Catherine made sure Charlotte always sat beside her. During walks around the estate, Catherine kept a hand on her daughter's shoulder or held her hand gently, never letting her stray too far. Camilla, for her part, mostly kept to herself, chatting with her own circle, laughing a little louder than usual when the group of cousins played nearby. But she never approached Charlotte directly, not once, and maybe that was the point. A new era at Balmoral. This summer marked a silent but monumental shift in the royal family's dynamics. The hierarchy was still there on paper, the titles, the roles, the protocols, but emotionally, things had changed. Catherine was no longer the quietly accommodating duchess who overlooked comments for the sake of harmony. She had found her line, and she'd made it clear. Her children were off limits. Camilla had gotten the message, loud and clear. When the summer came to an end, the family followed tradition with the usual photo on the steps of Balmoral Castle. The photographers captured the moment. The royal wave, the perfectly coordinated outfits, the smiles that hinted at unity. But behind the smiles, everyone in that photo knew the truth. The relationship between Catherine and Camilla was no longer one of forced politeness and quiet submission. It was a cold truce, built on boundaries Catherine had no intention of ever letting slip again. For Charlotte, perhaps, the lesson was quiet, but lasting. Kindness matters, but so does standing your ground. And for the rest of the royal family, a new reality had set in. Catherine wasn't just the future queen consort. She was a mother first, and she wasn't afraid to put anyone, even a queen, back in their place when it came to protecting her children. As the family waved to well-wishers at the castle gates, smiling for the cameras one last time that summer, one question lingered quietly in the minds of many. What happens when the new generation starts rewriting the rules in a monarchy built on tradition? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. And that's it from us today. Until next time, thank you for watching.